Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of The Direct Line. My name is Jackie Sackstein. I'm not your usual host, but tonight I'll be introducing our first guest, who is very special to me and one of my personal heroes, and that is my father, Dr. Adam Sackstein.
Thank you, Jackie.
And from there, I'm going to let Mark and Dwight and Brian take over.
We'll jump in and ask questions. Okay. Well, Dwight, I'll let you lead off. Did you have a question?
Yeah. So how are things at the hospital with things going crazy in New Jersey?
Well, fortunately, I'm in private practice. I don't practice at a hospital, which I'm very happy about right now.
Yeah.
It's interesting. New Jersey is really two states. There's northern New Jersey, which is New York, and southern New Jersey, which is Philadelphia.
Yep.
So I live outside of Philadelphia.
Okay.
We haven't gotten hammered yet. There are some cases, but the hospitals actually here for the most part, except for the one university hospital, are really quiet. I actually spoke to a friend of mine, Mark, who's a house physician at Virtua, which is the dominant system here. And he said it's as quiet as he's ever seen it because the BS cases aren't coming in, the elective stuff's all been canceled, and there aren't that many COVID patients yet. That may change over the next couple of weeks, but at least in this area right now, it's not too bad, although Philadelphia is starting to ramp up.
Yeah, we got I've got a nephew that's a resident right now at Rice University Hospital. He was really excited when it first got started because he was like, young, going to med school and all that. It's like, hey, wow, this is my first, adventures in pandemics. And now he's kind of like, when will this end?
Yeah.
Dwight, I think that's an example of be careful what you hope for.
Yeah.
Exactly. You get over that very quickly when reality sets in.
Yeah. He's idealistic, I guess, very young,
So one of the things that's really remarkable about this is how quickly it has progressed. And it's actually kind of worth going back through the timeline from December into January into February. I was looking today at the guidance from the World Health Organization. As late as mid-January, they were still saying they didn't realize, or they were not ready to confirm. Let's put it the right way. Ready that the corona was being transmitted by human-to-human contact. I guess that sets up an open-ended question: Was our early warning, was our surveillance not in place? Should we have known more, or should we be blaming the Chinese or something else?
So I think a lot of it is, you can only draw conclusions and models based on the information you have, and we were clearly given erroneous information early on. The Chinese tried to hide this, like they do many things, because they don't want to be embarrassed or whatever it is. But so the original information was there's no human-to-human transmission, and viruses vary. There are viruses that are not human-to-human transmitted, others are. So we started off with bad information. And then it takes a while for things to, become prevalent enough in the population that you can draw your own conclusions. And the other thing is that I think there's been a desire to not panic the public, to not do what we're doing now, which is in a very real way crash our economy and not overreact. And so as long as the belief was that it wasn't really human-to-human transmission, it was, okay, well, we don't have to do the kind of draconian things that we're currently doing to try to stop the spread. And that has obviously evolved. The other thing is, I don't know who runs the World Health Organization and who kind of formulates these kinds of policy positions. We've each been watching, Anthony Fauci and Deborah Birx on TV every day. And I think they are, they're very smart, they're very experienced, and in a lot of ways, they're uninhibited by a system that is designed to not let them express their opinions. That's what Americans do. We just tell it like it is. In China, you express your opinion. If it doesn't conform with what they want, you disappear, as has happened with the physicians who initially tried to get the word out about this. So I don't know how the World Health Organization decides what they're going to do, but I think, like I said, we started off with erroneous information, and it only became evident further, later on, that we were facing something very different. The other issue is people tend to see what they want to see, and no one wanted this to turn into what it has become.
That absolutely, yes, that certainly makes sense. And what's even, I mean, jumping ahead to when the shutdown began to come in, with more and more jurisdictions, one of the challenges was to convey the math that was involved of what exponential growth, where it was doubling, I think, as often as every 3 or 4 days. That people, I remember being on a television show, they were talking about, well, we only have, I think at that point, we only had about, I mean, it was barely 1,000 cases, but the fear, of course, was that it doesn't take very long, doubling every 4 days, for 1,000 cases to reach 1 million. And hence the need to bend the curve. So that was another challenge that people really kind of wrapping their minds around, that particular aspect of what is the phenomena of a disease that's moving forward very quickly.
Right. I mean, 3 of us on this are old enough to remember those Clairol commercials. You tell 2 friends and so on and so on. And in very short order, the screen is filled with images too small to see.
Right.
It's the same thing. That people don't realize what exponential growth is, because we don't really see it. And so a relatively small population can become a very large population, especially in a society that, is very free and where we interact with each other a lot. The other thing is that when you look at the media coverage of this, what you see is New York. And the rest of the country, for the most part, is not New York. It's starting to look that way in New Orleans, Detroit, but because the New York is the center of the world for most of the media, what you're seeing is really the worst situation currently out there in the United States. Most of the rest of the country is not in that position, at least not yet, which is why I think we really have an opportunity, if we can really enforce this, social distancing and all that other stuff, to not have the other major cities become New York. But if we don't, and one of the concerns I have actually is New York is probably peaking now or in the next few days. And what that means is that 10 days to 2 weeks from now, New York's going to probably look a lot better, right? Because it's usually 10 to 12 days or so from infection to when you get really, really sick. The problem we may run into is that in 2 weeks, New York looks a whole lot better. And people start to say, oh, New York's much better, New York's better, we've got it under control. And then the people in all the other places around this country say, oh, I can go back out and I can start doing things. And then you're going to see other cities and other places turn into New York 3 or 4 or 5 weeks down the road.
Right. Now, I was struck by the phenomena. We're here, most of us, not you, obviously, but most of us are in Maryland, of tracking the increase that was taking place nationwide and with Maryland. Now, obviously, you're not looking directly at the Maryland statistics, but I was fascinated by the fact that they basically Maryland is growing at a slightly faster rate, but basically it is in tandem with the rest of the country. And that's been going on now for 3 or 4 weeks. And I guess I had the expectation that with the distancing that was taking place, the percentage growth would end up slowing down to at least single digits per day. And that really has not been happening yet.
So remember, there's a lag, right? Because it takes probably anywhere from 7 to 14 days for most people to really show symptoms. Everything lags by about 2 weeks or so. And that's part of one of the points that Anthony Fauci has been making, right, is that yes, we're doing this. Yes, we think it's working. You're not going to see the results show up until we get further down the road. So it's the same thing. You're not going to see that change in the growth curve until right about where we're starting to get to now. And so you would expect over the next week or 2 to really see that start to flatten out if we're really doing this right.
Well, that actually raises the question. So here in Maryland, we saw in the last 24 hours a 20% spike, which would be consistent if it were maintained of doubling every 4 days, even though we're now after we've been about 3 weeks in having an essential shutdown. And it's not shelter in place, but it's been a shutdown of most large activities. So we're still waiting. Now, I don't know, it could have been that there was a surge of testing in the last 24 hours There was certainly an initiative that was taken on because of real concern about our nursing homes. So if they suddenly began doing testing at a lot of nursing homes, you could have a one-day spike like that. But again, I guess here in Maryland, we're really watching the fact that it is very much continuing to grow, and we're worried that it ends up looking like New York.
Right. Well, and that's another thing that you just mentioned. Yeah. Well, but the other point you just made is important, which is there's unquestionably many cases out there that we haven't identified, either because they're not symptomatic, or they're mildly symptomatic and they think they have, a cold, or we simply didn't test. So there's no doubt that over the next few weeks, as really large scale testing comes online, some of what you see is simply going to be recognition of cases that were out there all along that we just didn't know about.
Right. It's an interesting phenomena as I've watched. Now, one of the great sites, and it's in Maryland, is Johns Hopkins has a wonderful site that tracks by county and by country the number of cases around the world. And I was fascinated that in some I was looking at South Korea, that although they have basically flattened, there really is like about barely a 1% per day increase. If you look back 3 weeks or more, basically there hasn't been a recovery rate. Basically, most of the cases percentage-wise that existed 3 weeks ago are continuing. I'm curious, could that be a phenomenon in the numbers generally, that we don't identify when people have recovered as effectively?
Right. So I think part of that, and I don't know definitively, but I think part of that is, as I understand it, the definition of recovery is 2 negative tests. And so they may well not be testing people nearly as much at this point, number one.
Right.
And number two, like for instance here, right now, we still don't have enough tests to go around. So if
right.
testing a suspected case, we're trying to do 2 tests to confirm recovery. We're not testing those people.
Right.
And so, yes, because I've been surprised, because I look at those websites too. And so, yeah, the number of people who are recovered seems to lag, substantially where you would expect it to be. But I suspect that's because the definition of recovery is something that no one's particularly focused on satisfying right now.
Sure.
That's my phone.
Dwight, do you have any questions? Oh, Dwight.
Just checking the phone. Well, Dwight's on mute, but another thing.
Okay.
Yeah, no, another topic, if you want to cover, Dad, is just like, you as a doctor, you're also a business owner. How has this affected you as a business owner? Or I guess you're not really there anymore.
We're getting killed. I mean, I'm a partner in a couple of ambulatory surgical centers because I do interventional pain management. Our ambulatory surgery centers have all been closed by basically the order of the governor. All of our staff has been furloughed. My practice volume is down by 60%. We've furloughed half our staff. We'll see if we qualify for the PPP. That remains to be seen. One of the ASCs, one of the surgical centers, is affiliated with USPI, which is a publicly traded company. And because of the affiliation rules, they're probably not eligible. My practice is affiliated with a private equity-backed national pain management company. Because of the affiliation rules, we're probably not eligible. And so hopefully they fix that, because that is not what the affiliation rule was meant for with the SBA. But right now, as it stands, our general counsel and the legal opinions we've gotten say we're not eligible. And so, the only people who suffer from that are obviously our employees. So hopefully they will correct that, and we will be able to access the PPP. But I know every physician I know, we have friends who are, in multiple other specialties. Everybody's office is empty. I mean, we're doing telemedicine, but volume is just down across the board. And that's why the hospitals are empty too. The elective procedures are basically all not being done to conserve PPE. And because there's at least in New Jersey, the governor's order said, listen, you should not be doing anything that's not an emergency, because if you have any sort of a complication, we don't want that patient to end up at the hospital. Now, the truth of the matter is that makes a lot of sense right now in the northern half of the state. Where I am right now, truthfully, it probably doesn't make much sense, but it doesn't matter because the order is statewide.
Good, thank you. Dwight, did you have a question?
No, I got my questions out in the beginning. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna. That's how I was tossing back to you.
Oh, thank you very much. I did have one last question before we let you go, and you can return that phone call you got. I was fascinated.
It was spam. Don't worry about it.
Well, we had worried it was like a COVID. Well, anyway, we won't go there. Quick question is there's been some discussion about digital thermometers, and there's a thermometer that is able to track where there's a spike in temperature and then breaks out the geography. I don't know if you've seen any news stories about it, but one of the fascinating things was it was showing sort of a map of where the number of people with increased temperatures were going up and going down, and it was showing a substantial decline. It made me wonder, with all the social distancing, are we seeing less of other diseases? Are we, for example, have the flu season come to an end early?
Right. Well, it's interesting. I mean, you should, right? Because for the same reason that social distancing decreases transmission of coronavirus, it should decrease the transmission of every other infectious disease as well. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of the day you do see a drop off in what the overall numbers for the flu season look like, and anything else that's infectious, because it should work on everything.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Doctor. We really appreciate your taking time to join us today.
My pleasure. For my princess, I would do anything. So
Thank you.
Thank
take
you.
care.
Thanks, Dad.
Thanks.